that an appropriate amount of time? Okay.
Our processes and also talk to job providers and housing builders. It'd be me, you, maybe 2 or 3 aldermen, maybe Jonas. Maybe Jonas has already done it, I don't know. But would you be interested in something like that? I think so, because they're really refabbing Nashville. It's really growing.
We don't have the answers here, but we would have already addressed it.
That's right.
Good job,
Okay.
Don.
I'll see what I can do. Preferences
stay where you are.
Okay.
Yeah, I thought he saw me, but he didn't. It's not on.
Hey, Hillary.
Mine's so quiet.
Ask her. No, I agree. But I think she can. I think she
Maybe not. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Apologize for the delay. We start here. We're going to start off with the Pledge of Allegiance. Marshall, will you follow up with?
Bow your heads with me, please. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this evening, to be able to gather together as citizens and leaders in the community to make the best decisions that we can for our future. We all know that when topics come up like this that draw a lot of community attention, it's very important that we're given the wisdom and discernment, not only to move forward, but we are thankful for the wisdom that we've been given in crafting this and all the important staff work that has gone into it. In Jesus' name we pray, amen.
Thank you, Marshall. Madam Clerk, can we get a roll call vote, please?
Lucas,
Yes.
Denham,
Here.
Cooper,
Here.
Milton,
Yep.
Howden,
Here.
LeBlanc,
Here.
Schultz. Your Honor, you have a quorum. Your Honor, this is the public hearing and first reading of Bill Number 6472, an ordinance for the municipal code amendments throughout Chapter 94, including but not limited to the industrial zoning district noise regulations and special use requirements for data centers, data mining, and similar industries.
Thank you. We will now open up this as a public hearing and first reading of Bill Number 6472, an ordinance for our municipal code. And we'll get an introduction from Alex.
Good evening, Mayor and Board. Before you this evening is a proposed ordinance to update our city codes to address and provide a clear regulatory framework for the development and operation of data centers within our city. As you may recall, in early June, a resolution was enacted declaring a 100-day administrative delay on the issuance of applications and permits involving data centers and crypto mining currency centers. In summary, this administrative delay was a protective measure put into place to allow the time needed for our city to better explore and understand this emerging technology and industry, while also providing the necessary time to comprehensively evaluate and ensure our city regulations are appropriately updated to account for advancements in this specific industry. After careful evaluation of our city codes, it was determined we required modernization in order to provide for the general health, safety, and welfare of our community and to provide a clear framework to efficiently process data center development applications by the city in the future. The protection of public safety and welfare is critical to our role here at City Hall and in serving our local community. As we embarked on developing this ordinance, we were mindful to achieve a balance between the regulations needed to protect the public and the regulations and considerations needed to ensure the future development of other emerging industries and technologies in our city. So in order to accomplish this effectively, we felt it mandatory to listen to our community and gather feedback from the regulated industry. Through stakeholder meetings, our written public comment period, and extensive research, our staff gained valuable insight into the perspectives of our community members and the technical considerations of the data center industry, all of which have resulted in the balanced ordinance before you this evening that is protective of our community, yet allows for development and business growth. I'd like to remind you, this proposed ordinance is a regulatory framework designed to regulate an industry at large, not any specific project. In closing, we have opened a formal written public comment period that can be accessed by emailing publiccomment@bransonmo.gov. I'd also like to thank those who have already taken the time to provide their comments, input, and thoughts on this important topic. Comments from the public and industry help our municipality to better understand the needs of our community, considering differing points of view, improve the quality of our policymaking, and ensure our city government reflects the values of our community for a brighter and better future. Although tonight is the first read of this proposed ordinance, we strongly welcome and encourage continued feedback from interested community members and others. With that, I'd like to introduce Holly Dodge, our city attorney, to provide you with a staff report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gerard. Board of Aldermen, thank you for your time and consideration in regards to this matter. We've all put in a lot of time and effort on this, and this is a reflection of those considerations. We came to you and asked for an administrative stay on June 4th, 2024. We are now 70 days from, we will be 70 days from that if you pass this at second read on August 13th. We are 55 days from it when we had our Planning Commission public hearing in which they are giving you their proposed ordinance. So this is really fast for such a heavy lift that the nation and the world is looking at and trying to determine. The recommendations to the municipal code amendments in Chapter 94, which is our zoning code, are inclusive of Article 1 in general, which is the definitions. We needed definitions to be brought up to current terms. Article 4, which is our uses, our table of uses, our permitted uses, standards, and special use standards. And then Article 7 for landscaping and screening. So this goes across our zoning requirements in that Chapter 94. Well, it doesn't want to advance. I pushed the button. Okay. The code amendments you will hear tonight are regarding special use requirements, buffering to residential uses and districts, manufactured non-residential engineered units. We had to come up with a term to describe what is utilized for crypto mining in data centers. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that. Site requirements will be regulated, noise regulations and decibel maximums. We've suggested set standards, as well as a requirement of agreements for energy consumption. We can't regulate energy except for our water, but we can ensure that they are meeting the requirements for that. First and foremost, we needed to update data centers. Our data center language, as you can see, that's in the black. It was 30 or 40 years ago, and now data centers are not about phones or the processing center. It's a more high-tech, but a more transient type of processing. And so we added what you see in the blue to the term for data center. We then defined manufactured, engineered, non-residential units, and we're going to call those menus. And those are creating a definition to that type of structure. It's not an appliance. It is an accessory use, but we had to come up with some way to delineate what these are. It is in our recommendation for the definition, we require that it be engineered, that an engineer determines that this structure is accurate and as required, that it's manufactured for that use. It's not somebody who's repurposing something. And we do define it as a structure, which matters later on. We then had to describe and define the current terms of usage, which are what are popular. And those are what you're seeing now: the cryptocurrency data center, commercial cryptocurrency mining, and cryptocurrency server farms. Those weren't even in people's thought process. Now they're something the whole world is talking about. We then had to address what you probably have heard the most comments about, which is the noise aspect of cryptocurrency and data centers. And so we had to define the terms in regards to sound. If you're going to regulate it, you've got to define what you're regulating. So we defined decibel, noise disturbance, and sound pressure level. Those were not previously defined. We are suggesting changes to 9460.1, which is our permitted uses table. Currently, a data center is permitted, and that's the old definition of data center, which means it's automatically allowed. We are suggesting, because we don't really have anything in the business district is office or light industrial, not retail. So we're eliminating it from that terminology and changing it to a special use permit for industrial. Next, we're looking at the standards for use and structures in industrial uses. We are tweaking D, which is making it clear. We took out the nebulance of conditions normally found in a residential neighborhood. I'm not sure there's much that's normally found in a residential neighborhood. And we have such variety in our neighborhoods that really is not a good terminology. So it's not causing those nuisances past the boundary of the lot. So keep your stuff inside. We also added the requirements, because that's everyone's concern: vibration and noise. That's the most common concerns in regards to data centers, the large data centers that make the headlines in regards to crypto mining. And so we wanted to reflect on that in here. We also reference Chapter 58, 262, which is the definition, the only thing we have regulating noise in the noise ordinance, and that's enforced by our police department. So that's separate from our zoning. So, special use standards, most important lift after we've defined everything. Now we've got to qualify that. So we looked first at site requirements, and our first and foremost was the primary structure. As all of our zoning and our building requirements are, you must have a primary structure and a primary use, and then you can have accessory uses and accessory structures. That's why menu being defined as a structure is important. You can only do data processing, the data center work, within a menu or a primary structure. We looked at addressing the good neighbor issues, which is the buffering, the distance requirements, and utility lines. Utility lines are required to be underground. We looked at other controversial crypto mining and data centers, and that was one of the most unsightly things we saw, was all these lines and telephone poles. It's not just aesthetics and unsightly, it also means that when there's storms, you now have a higher risk for fire, shorting, etc. So that's always a concern of ours, the health and safety of our citizens or anyone out there. This is a concern for us at any point in time. So special use standards, we then looked at sound and noise requirements. We require on-site monitoring of sound before the certificate of occupancy is issued, and that must be done by a professional engineer. Again, we're looking at ensuring that everyone's a good neighbor. We have time restrictions for that testing, and we also have sound pressure levels where we look at each property line And that includes the use of generators, another controversial aspect that we saw time and time again in our research in this. So utility requirements, well, we can't regulate utilities. Utilities require that there be a utility agreement, and we're just asking that that be part of the special use permit. If that changes, there's additions of menus, you would have, or you upgrade the menus to greater wattage use, then we require that you come back for an additional special use permit. Additional key points are that we have a provision regarding ownership by foreign adversaries. Screening requirements, another issue that's aesthetics related, but it also has to do with protection of somebody wandering upon this area. So we require, as we do with other appliances on properties, we're requiring that same screening requirement to be integrated through the landscaping, fencing, and/or a decorative wall. We have height regulations that it must be at least the height of the items. There can be a line of sight because you have a lot of hills, so there could be a line of sight study required. We do prohibit the use of the chain link fencing for that mechanism. We find that while it may be a cost-friendly option to thread those plastic screens, threads through it to make it opaque, it oftentimes becomes a trashy situation and they degrade. So we are opting to prohibit chain link fencing. So that concludes my presentation tonight. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Does the board have any questions? If not, I'd like to open it up to the public and hear what they say.
Thank you.
If you're interested in speaking, please come to the mic. Just share your name if you would, and if we can, let's try to keep our time on our comments limited so we can respect others having time to speak. So who's the first one out of the gate?
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good to see you all again. I'd like to start off with a quote.
Can we have your name really quick?
Oh,
for the
sorry.
record?
My apologies. Yes, Gabe Palacios. Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay, there we go. So I'd just like to start off with a quote from former and likely future President Trump last Thursday in Nashville. Quote, "This afternoon I will lay out my plan to ensure that the United States is the crypto capital of the planet and the Bitcoin superpower of the world. I want Bitcoin to be mined, minted, and made in the USA." End quote. When told that a lot of companies were moving their crypto mining operations to other countries, he responded simply, "We are going to stop that. We have to stop the hostility and the overregulation. I will stop it." So moving on to the particular zoning laws and ordinances that we're looking at tonight. Zoning laws are created for the simple purpose of protecting the health, safety, and welfare of the people as it relates to the general land use. Zoning, however, can be a useful tool for progressive growth policies, or it can also be used as a regulatory barrier to progress. As it is currently written, the drafted ordinances are clearly being used as regulatory barriers to progress. Regarding any future project, we must ask ourselves the following questions to find the truth in any matter. And those questions are quite simply, first, does the ordinance protect and promote the health, safety, and welfare of the citizens of Branson, Missouri? And two, does it promote a progressive business growth, or is it needlessly prohibitive to the development? So let's start with the first item in question. SPL, or sound pressure level, and decibel levels as weighted in C frequency versus A frequency. I've spent a ridiculous amount of time in the last 4 days on the phone and emailing with OSHA compliance officers and licensed Missouri engineers and sound testing laboratories. And I can say quite confidently that we need to completely strike lines 101 through 104 and lines 187 through 227. These sections contain over 450 words to describe how noise will be tested And in the words of Missouri licensed engineer Philip J. Wentz, who is a principal with McClure Engineering, who described the passage as, quote, definitely not fair and technically not accurate. These lines only confuse and complicate and are per the OSHA St. Louis Regional Office Compliance Officer, quote, not recommended as they are not national standards set forth by OSHA. I recommend that instead this entire section be replaced quite simply by the following line. Noise and sound requirements, quote, noise and sound levels of the subject property line shall meet all applicable regulations and codes as set forth by the U.S. Department of Labor, Occupational Safety and Health Administration. In other words, what I'm trying to explain is that we've put some very complicated language in there right now that deals with dBA versus dBc and sound readings. And I think although perhaps it could have been in good nature, I've talked to so many different engineers this past week, and none of them understand why we would ever use dBc instead of dBA for this type of regulation. So I'm saying simply, let's use the gold standard that's used nationwide. Let's simply use OSHA standards and put them in place. Most other companies and any other any other agency you deal with would shy away from OSHA and say, please don't put their standards on us. They're very hard to meet. I'm saying, why not use the gold standard? Let's implement OSHA. Any deviation from this national gold standard in safety and compliance puts the city of Branson in a precarious legal position as it opens the door for unwanted legal action as it pertains to this ordinance and similarly zoned properties. Second, item in question is line 156, which dictates a 50-foot setback requirement in lieu of the already present 20-foot setback requirement. Again, let's ask the two questions. Does the ordinance protect and promote health, safety, and welfare of the citizens of Branson, Missouri? And two, does it promote progressive business growth, or is it needlessly prohibitive to development? When the subject property already has ordinances that restrict the visibility through visual barriers and sound through noise regulations, how, therefore, can we also try and restrict how someone utilizes their own property? The 50-foot setback does nothing further to protect the health, safety, and welfare, and is simply put another needlessly prohibitive barrier to development. Third, the item is line 152, where the primary structure is said to be built prior to the installation of the menu. When the menus are clearly defined with very good language, in fact, to protect the usage of temporary units, and the electrical is dictated to be buried underground in such a way that dictates a huge additional expenditure on part of the subject development, then why also dictate that the primary structure shall be built prior to the menus? This does nothing further to protect health, safety, and welfare, and is simply put another needlessly prohibitive barrier to development. Trump has been very critical of government overregulation, which has impeded progress and growth in this country. I want you to ask yourselves how he would vote tonight if he was sitting on the board. And keep in mind that nobody's advocating for any kind of leniency or bending of the rules. In fact, we're asking that you implement the most stringent regulations that are actually used, not some made-up standard that no one can understand and even engineers have a hard time explaining. I'm going to read something from an email that was sent to me by a licensed Missouri engineer, Philip Wentz, from McClure Engineering. He's one of their principals. And he says, the biggest issue is the sound pressure level definition on lines 101 through 103 on page C, or on page 3. C weighting would typically be A weighting to correspond with how humans hear, but the rest of the definition is actually worse. Sound level meters have 3 typical time response times. Slow for 1 second, fast is 120 meters per second, and impulse 35 meters per second. The proposed standard indicates a 10 meter per second response, which is not a standard, nor does a time response correlate to peak detection. In sound level meter specifications, peak level sensing is dependent on the instrument themselves and by definition not based on a time response. Maximum sound levels are typically reported with time constraints. There can be a 20 increase in peak level reporting over max level report, which is higher than an average level. This is definitely not fair or technically accurate. So I say all that to say, you've got a good basis written in here, but there are some items that clearly I think you've taken into your own hands to develop some sort of obstructive way of measuring sound when we can simply say the national OSHA, Occupational Safety and Health Administration, spends millions and millions of dollars every year on research and development to keep everybody safe. They're the most stringent guideline that exists. Why not simply adopt their standards, just like we do with the International Building Code or any other type of uniform building standard nationwide? Thank you.
Thank you, Gabe. Nobody else wants to share? See, that'll get them out of their seats.
All right, can you hear me? Yeah, good. Sweet. All right, well, my name is Keaton Holland. I live at 177 Country Ridge Way, just a mile from the proposed location of this site. So that puts me in Ward 2. So just thank you, Mayor and Honorable Aldermen, and just city officials as well for allowing me to speak tonight. Again, my name is Keaton Holland. I've been a resident of Branson for roughly 6 years now. Moved my family here before I deployed to Afghanistan because we loved it here. We still love it here. I love the people, Christian culture, and the vibrancy of our town, and just the nature as well. I love managing security for Sight and Sound. I've been doing that for about 3 months now. So, again, a company that's right in line with our culture and our values and what we represent as well. So I'm here today because of current concerns, obviously, for this amendment and support of this amendment. I'm worried that the speaker previously before me, and businesses like him, this current business and industry that is notorious, I mean, just do a quick Google search, for negatively impacting local resources like electricity and nature, of course, noise pollution, which we're all concerned with, driving down or out local residents due to housing prices or health impacts, is moving right next to where I live, literally a mile down the road. So this is obviously a very passionate point for me in that regard, as this could financially and physically hurt my family. This ordinance does protect the health and benefit of those in Ward 2. Regardless of what President Trump would or wouldn't do, he is not here. His vote is not in question, but yours is. God has appointed you leaders over us in this case and moment. So please don't worry and cave to the what-if scenarios or even potential and passive legal threats of what may or may not come. Your job and your goal and your assignment is to do the best you can with what you have presented in front of you in this moment. I appreciate the ordinance work and ideas and the research of the Branson staff. Some of them are in this room. Trust their recommendations. They've done their homework. They've talked with other cities. They've dove into the books. So trust their recommendations and their legal protections. We have to get this right, and I agree. But I agree in listening to this meeting and past meetings as well. I think they've done their homework enough that we can trust not only the recommendations, one, but also to their expertise in these matters. We must get this decision right because this decision impacts roughly, just in this current situation, over on Branson Commercial Parkway, around 100 plus families in that approximate 1 to 3 mile radius there. A majority of those families are either largely unaware of what is happening or they won't know the impacts until it's too late without any regulation. So until they can't stop listening to the hum of fans 24/7, or when they go to sell their houses and they've lost thousands in equity, I don't want to over-dramatize the situation, but this decision cannot be made lightly. So thank you again for your service to this community. Please do the right thing and the hard thing in this moment. Don't do what's easy or expedient in passing the buck. I'd like to thank Alderman Schultz and Alderman Lucas as well for helping in this and advocating for us in Ward 2 as well. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you. I'm sorry, your name was Keith? Eaton. Keaton. Keaton. Thank you, Keaton.
Bob Hewells. I have 3 requests or recommendations that we consider. First, I'd like the council to please look at language, or rather the chart in Chapter 94, Article 4, entitled Uses, where we have, where the proposed ordinance amendment would change this from a permitted use in industrial zoning. It eliminates business, which is fine, but in doing that, it lumps several trying to figure out how to say this. I had a long 5-minute thing, and it's not going to work. So the problem I see with that particular language is that we are going to go through all this process to create an ordinance to control what we're going to do and what is and isn't allowed. And then the same people have to come back through a second time to do a special use permit, where it's my understanding and my historical knowledge that a special use permit can ignore the ordinance and rewrite it because it's written for a special use permit. So I don't see why we're coming for a second time. If you're going to give us all the ordinance and give us all the regulations, why come back for a special use permit? Make them meet whatever your regulation is, and then you don't need a special use permit. That was one of my points. The ordinance lumps several uses in that same form or spreadsheet. Says that the data as a data center. I just want to point out that companies like Travelocity, Expedia, who we tried very hard to get to move here and open up, those are data centers. They have no menus. There's no reason why they should have to put a brick wall around their building in order to hide a beautiful new building that they built that everybody works inside at. So we've mixed two different uses, and we're giving them the same rules. I also want to point out that the setback that's in the other section, it's 94, I don't have that number. Setback and screening is set, and I want to point out that if you had, because I know we're not talking about a specific location, if you had a 3-acre parcel and you wanted to do this on it, most 3-acre parcels will have anywhere between 1,800 and 2,000 linear feet of circumference. At a 50-foot setback, that's roughly 40% of the property. That's not being used for anything but setting it back. If we're going to work with menus and worry about the sight and the sound of those, setting them back 50 feet from the wall that's made to hide them is probably the opposite of what you want to do. I would think we want them as close to that wall as we can, because I'm not an engineer, but in 6th grade I learned that sound waves go like this and like this. And if they're going like this and we're 50 foot away, the sound's going to go right over the wall anyway. Let's not have the setback if we're going to have the wall. Or have the wall, or don't have the wall and don't worry about it, because 50 foot back is going to let the sound travel right over the top of the wall. So I do think we need to look at that. And then the third is the requirement of a primary structure. I know it was put in here already. First of all, the thought that this is a transient business with them putting a little over $2 million under the ground is a little ambiguous, a little incorrect. Okay, they're going to spend over $2 million to put all of this stuff that you're requiring underground. They got to put a brick wall all the way around the thing, and you want them to have to build a building first. I submit several ideas. If I wanted to build, that are transient, just as transient as this would be. If I wanted to put an RV park in, I would be allowed to put an RV park in, but I wouldn't be required to build the clubhouse first. And all they're doing is putting utilities underground, like these people are going to, and all they're going to do is have access to those utilities, and they can leave if they want to. Now, they will leave a lot of money because it costs a fortune to put stuff underground in this part of the country. So it's not a transient business. We have go-kart tracks. We have go-kart tracks that are nothing but an asphalt track. How transient is that business? They can leave anytime they want. They won't. Why? Because they have millions of dollars tied up in building that business. They have underground utilities. They have above-ground utilities. They got an asphalt track. They're transient. They can move. It would take nothing to move. There's no buildings or anything. Why are we penalizing one industry when we don't penalize those industries? They're just as transient. So that was my point on the one. I did have another thing to mention. It just worries me, and that is that we're asking for all the, call them roads or walkways, to be hard surfaced. I've been doing everything I can to get people not to do hard surface any more than they have to because of impervious cover. If we're going to have a gravel walkway or driveway to go from one of these menus to the next, why would it need to be paved when the only thing that's going to be on it is foot traffic or an ATV that's got to carry a piece of equipment over to fix it? No people are ever going to be on it. So it worries me that we're going to have everything asphalted on this 3 acres or whatever 3 acres we're talking about. And it's almost all going to be asphalt because we have to have a parking lot for the big buildings. We have to have asphalt on the driveways and the walkways in between the menus. And then we're going to have asphalt back to the third building if we're talking about this particular project. And that's all the points I'd like to bring out. Thank you all so much.
Thanks, Bob.
Hi, my name is Mary. And so I live over in Lampe, and I do have a very strong opinion about this. First of all, though, I want to acknowledge this amazing council and the attorney for the work that you've put in this. I read it quickly. I mean, it's not really a quick document. What I'm really saying is I need to read it more closely, but I did go and underline all the important points, bolded. It's phenomenal. I will make sure that this ordinance, when it passes, I have confidence it will, I will make sure personally they get us around the entire world and definitely all around the United States, because this is the protection for the people. It's not just about a few people getting rich. This is about the good of the entire community, and Branson especially, being a town that is for tourism. I would like to invite you to go to Bono, Arkansas, in the Greenbrier area of Arkansas. And I've been to that facility, and it's right next to a woman with an autistic child. And it is so loud, and what they originally put around that facility were hay bales. Now they have a wood fence. It still vibrates her home. It's very dangerous to their health. I am worried about that family, but I care about every family across the United States of America. And as far as jobs, at that facility, it wasn't a lot of jobs. They have one guard, and guess what? A representative of Arkansas went to check it out because of all the complaints. He was greeted with a gun. Whatever kind of data that is, I have my own opinions about that. I think these data centers are not what they're saying, but you don't have access to that data to really find out. All these projects, if you dig deep enough, I'm not saying there won't be an exception to the rule, but I know in my research, on the ones that I researched in Arkansas, they all track to China. You just have to dig deep enough. And if you're looking for China, you'll find it. And I have concerns about the security of our country based on this. I think it's our own data that's being sent. And I wrote this in an email. And the reason why, and I think these people that have these facilities don't really understand the bigger picture, that this is a land grab across the United States of America. They want people out of rural America and into these 15-minute smart cities. And I'm being blunt about it, but that's what's going on. And sound is deadly. This kind of sound. This isn't an Amazon project. Amazon doesn't have a sound problem like this and an EMF problem. It kind of makes me angry because of how detrimental it is to people's health. I'm putting myself in my shoe. I'm pretending that this is right next to me. When you hear this, it is horrible, horrible, horrible. I wouldn't wish this on anybody. As far as being worried about getting sued, don't worry about that. You're doing the right thing. God will protect you. A great example of a town that's not worried about it is Pine Bluffs, Arkansas. They were threatened too. And the guy that threatened them, again, I dug deep, sure enough, he had Chinese connections. He backed off. They bought a building, a vacant building. Many times they choose buildings next to transformers. They can change one part in that grid and be talking to Shanghai. So I say we need that 50 feet, if nothing else, to keep them further away from the transformer. The water usage. Each transaction takes 4,200 gallons of water. It is a detriment to our fresh water. That is equivalent to a swimming pool. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot, but that's each transaction. Multiply that out. I would like to ask that somehow, I know I read something about that you wanted to track the water usage, but I really think it needs to go a little bit more in-depth if it's legal. I'm not a lawyer, is to ask that they are required to give you the monthly water bill, that they need to give the city the monthly water bill. Because of, it's not just a normal business using water for their employees or to run their business. This is using the town's water. There's a difference. And the last thing, there's an important law that just got reversed, and your attorney probably knows about it, and I feel like God led me that I would even know this, because it's not that I'm that smart, it's just that God gave me this piece of information. The Chevron ruling, as of was it 626 or 726? 620, it had to be 626. That means that more is gonna go to the local level to decide. Yay, I'm so glad about this. So congratulations for, I mean, you guys have, it's obvious how much work you've put into this. You obviously care about the citizens, and I couldn't be more proud, even though I've only been here 3 years. And I may not be in your district. I have talked to the commissioners over in Stone County. I alerted them a year ago. I was on my computer last night warning them. And I will be fervent to protect every state in America against this issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mary. Does that mean we've had all the speakers?
How you guys doing? My name's Michael Moffa. I'm a chief operating officer for a company that's going to be directly affected by this ordinance. I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the lines in the ordinance. I'm not going to talk too much about my company, but if anyone here is interested, I'm going to be here for the next day or two, so be happy to answer any specific questions. Gabe mentioned most of the points in here. Let me switch over to this. Line 220, that deals with the DBA, DBC issue that we were talking about before. I'm not an engineer, not a sound engineer. I'm an attorney for the company and an operations officer. I did go, however, the last 2 days with a decibel meter, probably looked a little bit crazy around town, but I got some readings, and I'm just gonna read off a couple of them to show you guys. The proposed plot line where we are, my company will be affected by this, the DBA reading is 38 to 40. That's the decibel level. The DBC reading is 67 to 80. So the plot of land by itself would be outside of this regulation. And the reason for that, again, I'm not an engineer, but the reason for that is it takes into account really low frequencies and really high frequencies. And so wind is a huge thing with these. Oftentimes DBC is used to measure fireworks. It's used to measure explosives like mines. It's also used to measure bass, like in music halls and things of that nature. Very specific places. From my research, it's like a vacuum and it's only absorbing the sound there, not adding it all together. So one of the other places I did was actually City Hall. I went out today and did that by the air conditioner. The DBA rating for that is 61 to 63. So that would be at the very high level of the DBA rating if this was switched, if this ordinance was switched from DBC to DBA. The DBC rating of that was 73 to 76, because it takes into account everything that is around it. So again, I'm not going to go too much into that. Gabe hit the nail on the head with a lot of those. I do want to answer some of the things that were brought up here prior. One of those being the, we'll start with the industry that we're in. Part of our business does do cryptocurrency mining, and there's a lot of other things that we do, a lot of AI, a lot of computational, a lot of retail sales. That's why I think when you guys drafted this, it was very well done. This is actually going to protect Branson from this industry because this industry is so notorious for coming into cities, using all the power, and setting up these machines that just radiate sound everywhere. This industry actually does not like our company. The reason for that is because we charge more than competitors because we pass on that cost to the customer because they pay for a higher quality building that these machines are in, they pay for a higher quality environment, and they pay to be in the United States. So water usage was brought up. We are not going to be water cooling any machines at this data center other than air conditioners. Any water that we would put in would be a closed loop system kind of like how a chiller is or an air conditioner, split unit type thing. Other than that, I know legal was brought up, a lawsuit. There's never been any talks of that. We want to be a part of a community. And sadly, everything about this ordinance is great, and it's going to protect you guys, because a lot of these stories that you hear online, these cities don't have these ordinances. They go in, and these companies are reactive, and that's when they have lawyers that will just, they'll just deal with it when the time comes. And they set up shop, and they're like, oh, well, it's an industrial zone, or it's outside of a municipality, it's not zoned, just deal with it. That's not what we're doing. Our company is very proactive. We've been talking with many of you. We've been talking with the citizens here, and again, after this meeting, I'm available for any questions or anything like that. But this industry is definitely a notorious industry for that. So all those concerns that you read online, all those stories that you read online, they're true. These people pop up shops in small cities. They take all their power. They hire one guy to manage the facility that's usually in a smaller building. We're putting a building right in front of it, where we're going to have people working, where we're going to have to abide by all these standards. We're not going to just have this thing radiating sound into a building where we're going to have 10 people within the first year there. So other than that, it's written very well. It will protect Branson from those stories that you read online. But the DBC, DBA issue is the big thing. And so we're asking you to switch that and the other things that Gabe mentioned earlier in today's meeting. But I think other than that, that is everything. So again, if anyone has any questions, anyone in the public or any alderman or the mayor, any questions, please let us know. And thank you for your time.
Thank you, Michael. Okay.
This is really important for everybody to understand. And this is what's going to happen to your electrical bill. It's going to skyrocket. So he talked about the electrical usage. So here's what happens. These Bitcoin operators buy their electrical energy in bulk from the utility company. So if it's ERCOT or if it's Pacific Core that Warren Buffett owns, it's more on the West Coast. Anyway, and then what happens during high peak times, they sell back that electrical energy to you, the consumer, at very high rates. So it's going to cause everybody's electrical bill to skyrocket. And during a time of inflation, when so many people can barely make it right now, we don't need extra charges for our electrical. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Alan Mock. I'm one of the developers for the proposed project, but I'm here tonight to take a look at fact versus fiction as to what we've heard. Just our former speaker, Mary talked about electric rates going up. After I'm done, I'm hoping that Devin will come up. She is the representative for White River. We did our homework. 2 years ago, we started a search, not just in Arkansas, Missouri, Oklahoma, looking for sites that we could take and develop. And we found a partner in coming into this area with White River. One of the things that was done, this site was built 20 years ago, a site. And nobody's taken the time to call us or talk to us. After the last meeting, we walked outside and said, if anybody wants to go to Florida and look at the site down there, anybody wants to talk to us, we're all here. Nobody has taken the time. Mary hasn't taken the time. The educator that spoke last week, she never talked to us. What's happening is everybody is taking a shot at this, like the energy issue, which we're going to address again. We talk about the setback requirements. Your setback requirements will take 40% of the land that the company is buying to use out there. The total of the acreage, and you put a 50-foot barrier around it, it's 40% of the acreage that we're buying. How many of you would buy a property and put a setback with a setback requirement and only use
Excuse me.
C, which is so important, all have put together today. I reach out to every one of you that are here tonight. If you have questions, come up and talk to us about it. We're happy to do it. Everybody gets scared of the unknown. And boy, I don't want to do that because I don't know enough about it. Or they research it or they think they research it and don't get the latest information available. We're here to help in any way, shape, or form about projects moving forward. And I thank you all for allowing us the opportunity to be here.
Thank you, Alan.
Good evening. My name is Christina Crowell. My husband and I own America's Best Campground in Branson, Missouri, which is located close to the industrial park. We are in favor of the new ordinance that is being presented. We would like to have RV Park Campground added to lines 162 and 222. ABC Campground has been a part of Branson's tourist community for 30 years. We're the most awarded park in Branson, including winning the Best of Branson RV Park Campground for 5 years and the Best of Southwest Missouri Campground for 2 years. We are an important asset to our tourist community. In 2023, our campground had over 11,000 guests staying, a total of over 24,000 nights. These guests bought over $155,000 worth of tickets from our campground alone, and that number does not take into account how much they spent elsewhere for shows, attractions, food, etc. Our motto is City Close, Country Quiet. Our park thrives on providing a peaceful and serene setting for our visitors, many of whom choose to stay with us to escape the noise and chaos of urban life. A noise disturbance could lead to a significant decline in our guest satisfaction and occupancy rates. The noise pollution will eventually drive away both current and potential customers, causing irreparable damage to our reputation and financial stability. We are in favor of the ordinance staying the same and requiring future businesses to meet the set guidelines as described. Implementing this ordinance would help not only our business, but also future businesses and residents that are close to the industrial park. We need to know that our 30-year-old campground is going to be protected by the city that we have supported for over 30 years. Thank you.
Christina, thank you very much.
Good evening. Again, Devin Sonnenfeld. Is that better? Okay. Devin Sonnenfeld with White River Valley Electric Cooperative. Again, like everyone has stated, appreciate everything and all the work that has gone into this. We, as a cooperative, appreciate everyone that has come out to speak against or for the ordinance to make changes. But just from our perspective and to what has just been said tonight, I just want to make sure that everybody understands, as a cooperative, we are different than an investor-owned utility. So we function completely different. We are owned by our members. We are not owned by investors. So I just want everyone to keep that in mind. So when we talk about a project or an ordinance that would involve a large project in an industrial park, we have to keep our members in mind. So when we look at something like this, what I just want to point out is that we vet this project simply because a project that would come into an industrial park, we would not extend service if we didn't have the capacity to serve that. That would be an irresponsibility on our part, right? Secondly, whenever anything would come into an industrial park, we're not going to be paying for those services for them. We are not going to be providing anything to them. We have infrastructure to a location. Anything beyond that is a responsibility of the developer or the project, okay? Because if we were to pay all those costs, we have to extend that to our members. That's not what we're in business to do, okay? And then lastly, I just want to make sure that everyone understands anything to do with a load the size that we would be talking about in an industrial park that this ordinance would be looking at, that is actually going to subsidize rates as a whole for our members. Because the more that there is use of power, that levels out everything and that allows for those rates to slowly decrease. So again, that's a difference between an investor-owned utility and a cooperative because we're local and we look at those things. So as an investor-owned, that's spread across a much larger territory than what we serve as a cooperative here, small and local. So I just want to clear the air on that so that everyone had that understanding. And again, this is speaking directly to industrial use, large use, and just make sure that everyone knows that because we do serve that property. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you, Devin. I was just reminded that during public hearings, I only wanted it, each speaker gets one opportunity. But you could whisper that to somebody who hasn't spoke yet. Just saying. Find a friend.
My name is Michelle, and I work for America's Best Campground. Thank you all for all the diligent work that you've done towards this ordinance. And now I'm nervous, so I'm going to read. I've been the group's coordinator there at the campground for almost 20 years. It'll be 20 years in May. And I'm in favor of this ordinance being put into place as written. The ordinance protects the residents and businesses surrounding the industrial zoned areas. Just pointing out, we did an event a couple nights ago for a group, and we can hear Silver Dollar City's fireworks display and their train whistles. We surely do need a tough ordinance for the industrial park that is right next door to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle.
Yeah, I'm Jack Jordan, a resident of Branson. We love our community. We appreciate all the work you folks have done to keep our city safe and a good place to live. I am completely like your new ordinance that you have. I hope it'll be accepted as that way. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack.
Folks, I'm here as a citizen and also as the chairman of your planning commission. I am not an expert in this. I knew nothing about it, but I've spent a lot of time trying to learn about it, going to a lot of meetings, listened to our legal, and have been involved in the development of this from the very beginning. And I want to call bullshit on the comment that we're trying to regulate and persecute this business. And I resent what that gentleman said, and I shouldn't have turned around and looked at him. I know, forgive me. But that's crazy. We had a new type of industry that we hadn't regulated before. We've got some regulations that are decades old that as we get around them, they're probably going to be rewritten. This one just happened to come to the forefront right now because it's an issue that we have to deal with. I can tell you that I would not have been involved in anything that was just trying to knock one company out of coming to Branson. I have my personal opinions about the value of it, but my objective was to work to get an ordinance that was fair to everybody, that protected our citizens, and I am just so proud of the way staff worked. There have been probably hundreds of hours that have gone in. Glenn and Artie, they held a conference over in the convention center. They went through that ordinance line by line. Folks,
you have to have some regulation. And sound is the big thing. They've addressed the water, they addressed the electricity. A lot of the stuff I heard about electricity and water tonight it's just a little bit bull roar. If you look at the regulation itself, it takes care of that smoothly and nicely. And I know you folks have looked at it. My recommendation would be change it only if there's an overriding reason to do so, because we have to have a starting point. And like all of our regulations and ordinances, they're not in concrete. They can be changed, and particularly with this administration and this board, you're very business friendly and ready to do that. But you got to start somewhere, and you got to have a basic foundation. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Just a heads up, the next words out of my mouth is I'm closing the public hearing, so don't be bashful. We want to hear from everybody. They'll get their questions when we're done here. That's what it says. I've already set a precedent. Come on up. I'll get you later.
I do appreciate this. I'll make it brief. First is for America's Campground, and I want to put all their worries to rest. We went out today and took a decibel meter reading at their location. As she said, it's quiet, it's peaceful, it's tranquil. Their decibel level is no more than 5 decibels away from what we're saying we would prescribe ourselves to be at under a DBA. They're actually at the limit of what's prescribed right now for DBC, and they're a residential district. This is why I'm saying we have an issue with the DBA versus DBC reading. It makes a great point. They're a quiet, tranquil area, not an industrial park, and they are at the threshold of what is being prescribed for us in an industrial zone. It makes a great example of what I'm talking about here, why we should stick to a national regulated agency like OSHA and what they prescribe. And I do apologize. I didn't mean to come out as strong as I was earlier. I do apologize to the gentleman at the Planning Commission. And, you know, yes, the ordinance is great. I do think the DBA versus DBC, I would suggest simply that if we're locked horns on that one issue, let's bring some sound engineers to the table. Let's bring some qualified Missouri licensed engineers, 2 or 3 of them. Let's bring them to the table. Let's bring an officer, a compliance officer from the OSHA office in Kansas City and one from the office in St. Louis. Let's sit them all at a round table and let's come to an agreement on what the proper decibel and sound levels should be. Because it sounds like that's the one thing that we're really hung up on, right? So let's get it right the first time. Let's do our due diligence there. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabe. Kathy, you're right.
You're right, Kathy. I tried to tell you, Mr. Mayor. But, folks, I hear about this nebulous OSHA requirement and all this study that's been done. What the hell is the OSHA requirement? What does OSHA say the DBA should be? I mean, you've been up here for 15 minutes talking about this. What is it? What should it be? In fact, tell us what the requirement is so at least you've got something to evaluate.
I got it. Thank you, Gary.
Yeah, you bet.
You don't get thirds.
Thank you, sir.
Nope.
Charles Hillis. Once again, I mentioned it the other evening, but we're talking about a particular company, and we shouldn't be.
No, you're talking about a particular company.
Right, but
We're talking about an ordinance.
we keep bringing up, and it needs to be about the ordinance.
That's right.
I've heard people say, well, this is what will happen, and I'm grateful that the ordinance is there, but that's not our company. And that's fantastic. I think that's great. But it's not about this company. It's about all the companies that this ordinance, it's just about the ordinance in the future. Every company is going to be different. Everyone is not the same. Some are going to be amazing and great neighbors, and some will not. That's just the fact of the way things are. It is about what we do, and I got this from Clay Cooper a year ago, who said, it's about the future and what we do years from now, and about the overall ordinance, and not a particular group or a particular company. It's just making sure we get the ordinance together properly, and then everybody can conform to it.
Thank you, Charles.
Clay did not say that.
I'm a wise man, aren't I?
Charles, I will tell you that I was advised that this whole conversation tonight was to be restricted to the ordinance itself. And maybe technically that's the way it's supposed to go. Holly's listening. However, I felt it was more fair to say, here's an ordinance that we're talking about approving citywide. There's going to be members in this audience that are residents or have concerns that surround our currently only industrial zone property. This ordinance says these types of uses have to be in industrial zoned. So I was more sympathetic to that. I also wanted to give the opportunity for that business to give interjections to an ordinance that could affect their particular business. We're not here talking about, are we approving them, right? There's no discussion about from this board and that business. But I felt it was prudent to at least listen to a business that will be affected by the ordinance we approved. So I gave lateral on both sides. So be it. Any other speakers? Going once? Twice? Public hearing is closed. Now, my aldermen have been barking at me. I want to talk. So, you've heard the first reading of bill number 6472. Do I have a motion approving this bill?
So moved.
So I have a motion, a second. Now, by chance, are there any Board of Aldermen that wish to speak regarding this matter?
Mr.
Ralph?
Mayor?
Oh, sorry.
Yep, I have, based on some of the feedback we've received over the last few weeks, I have a few amendments I'd like to propose, if I may.
Okay, before you do, Holly or Hillary, I'm anticipating hearing some amendments. My choices are, my preference would be, as we hear a motion for an amendment, can we discuss that and then vote that up or down versus getting 4 or 5 and then trying to do them all at once?
Yes, that would be the best
Very
way to do it.
nice. So, yes, Alderman Schultz, let's hear the amendments and we're going to address them one at a time.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So for the first amendment, I'd like to propose Section 94-62C2A to strike the word shall and replace it with may in the first sentence.
Should we put that, can we put the ordinance up there? What line was it, Glenn?
So line 162 as it's shown up there.
Okay.
I so move.
So we have a motion to change, replace the word shall with the word may. Do I have a second?
Second.
So we have a motion and a second. All in favor of this amendment? Hill, that good?
Yes.
All in favor of making this amendment from the board, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Ayes have it. Thank you. Glenn?
Yeah, the second amendment I'd like to propose was based on the comments and assistance from ABC Campground.
This involves two changes that really go hand in hand, so I'd like to propose them as the same motion, if that's okay. The first one is section 94-62C2C3, which begins with distancing requirements for residential places of worship. By reference, it's line 185 on the slide in front of you. I'd like to add the red word shown there, lodging establishments, and then after the word park to add lodging establishment, parentheses, including bed and breakfast inn, comma, campground, and recreational vehicle park, comma, hotel and motel, nightly rental, comma, and timeshare unit, close parentheses. Then on, directly related to that, because it goes hand in hand, on 94-62C2D3,
Line item 267, correct?
to add the words after daycare, comma, park, to add the words shown in red, lodging establishment, parentheses, including bed and breakfast inn, comma, campground and recreational vehicle park, comma, hotel and motel, comma, nightly rental and timeshare unit, parentheses closed. So moved.
Second.
Second.
So we have a motion and a second, and Glenn, would you like to share your thoughts on this, please?
Yeah, I think primarily here we recognized when the original draft of the ordinance was brought in front of us and the Planning Commission that the idea of this was to basically ensure additional setback and protections from more sensitive type establishments, things like churches and daycares. But it also became apparent that when you have a sleeping environment, it probably should get that equal type of protection. So these amendments basically add those types of facilities that we could reasonably expect people to be sleeping in so that they're not further disturbed by this type of noise.
Is that the amendments so far, Glenn?
That's it, so moved.
So we have a motion and a second. Any other aldermen want to address this proposed change? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Ayes have it.
And if I may, Mr. Mayor,
Yes,
I have
Glenn.
another one. In the issue of primary structure, if we could bring that slide up, please. Well, maybe I can proceed while they bring that up. Oh, here we go. Okay, so under C site requirements, so 94-62C2C number 1, primary structure, to add the words as shown after menu, a temporary use permit pursuant to section 94-64D12 may be requested for a temporary office while a primary structure is being constructed. So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
So we have a motion and a second. How does the board feel about this?
If I may just comment, Mr. Mayor,
Oh,
on
I'm
that?
sorry, Glenn, sure.
Yeah, so the idea here, Bob Cools, I think both in email and tonight brought up the point that while, given construction time and so on to construct the primary facility, it may make sense while that's underway to allow them to go ahead and install the menus and get that part going. I think our primary issue that we wanted to control here is that there truly is a primary structure, that we don't just end up with menus. And by getting a temporary use permit, our planning department is in control of that situation. If they see that the primary use structure the primary structure is not being pursued properly, is not following the construction timeline, they can withdraw that temporary use permit, bringing the project to a complete stop.
Any other aldermen?
Yes.
Artie?
When we first met with the gentleman regarding this project, they were very adamant that they were going to put a primary use structure in before anything else happened. Now they're coming back to us and saying, no, we don't want to do that. And I know that on many construction sites, there'll be a construction office that'll be set up, but I don't think that the purpose of this ordinance was to allow them to bring the menus in first. And that's what we're looking for there. I disagree with this amendment.
Ruth?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, thank you. I disagree with this amendment as well. Working in the Planning and Development Department for 14 years, and I'm not going to name the projects, temporary use permits were issued and were not followed through, and it caused a lot of concern, so I will be a no on this as well.
But isn't there a way to protect that if they don't follow up, if this project doesn't follow up with a permanent structure, that can be halted? I mean, isn't there some protection there on the backside? It's a question. I mean, I just want to understand what, if we did what Alderman Schultz's suggestion, is there some protection there that all of a sudden the menu's up and, well, we don't want to do a permanent structure now? You know what I'm saying?
Yes, and yes, those protections are in place. The director has the ability to revoke it if they do not have a valid and active building permit in place for the construction of a permanent business structure. They also have the ability to renew that if there's an appropriate, so it goes both ways. It gives them a time period, but it also gives the ability to renew. Say for some reason it is delayed, but it's an appropriate reason, it would allow for that. So it makes it more nimble or more able to deal with each individual circumstance to ensure success of a project.
Thank you.
Marshall? Ralph?
Yeah, I think my biggest hangup on this amendment as it sits is that, in any industry, if you have to put up a bricks and sticks building, like, you can't produce widgets until that manufacturing facility is built. So there's no profit being made. So, in essence, it gives one industry kind of like a leg up or a distinct advantage ahead of any other industry that comes into the area, whether it's manufacturing or even supply. I mean, if you're going to, do a distribution center, like, you got to build the building first. You got to put all the infrastructure in before you can send one box out. This, in essence, kind of overrides that, and it really gives one industry, like I said, a distinct advantage to be able to operate in this way without having to have that structure in place. And, and it's outlined in the ordinance that there will be a primary structure in place.
Kathy?
I appreciate that, Alderman LeBlanc. I think what we were trying to do here is recognize the unique nature of this industry, and as the industry stakeholders explained to us the way their setup works for their industry, I keep using that word, that it makes it virtually impossible for them to be held up, say, for a year build time on the primary structure to get that finished and to completion before they can put in what is the main focus of their business. And we thought this was kind of a good way to strike a middle ground in that it's a trust but verify, and that, as you heard before in the introduction of this, if in fact they don't follow through on that temporary use permit, I promise you, would be revoked from this administration. I can't speak to how things were done in the past in Branson because it was a whole different landscape then. But we are very, very consistent now in our equal application of the laws and expectations of every regulated industry, and that would be what we would do with this one. So just to give you that side.
And I definitely appreciate that. However, we're speaking of an industry that is based on deregulation. They don't want guardrails in place. They don't want oversight. They, that's how that entire industry works. And so, my thing is to the residents of this community. I mean, first and foremost, those are the people that vote us in, and I appreciate that. And yes, we have to be business friendly, but at the same time, we have a responsibility to the residents of the community to look at their interests first, because they're the ones that have been here. They're the ones that'll be here. And yes, industries come and go, but when you look at an industry that is based on deregulation, that's why we're having this conversation, is simply because our ordinance didn't fit the industry. Like we're updating it to fit an industry that basically took the world by storm, I mean, if we had to, put an age on cryptocurrency, it's like 8 or 9 years old. It's not even a teenager yet. So, these guardrails that we're putting in place is really to protect the residents of our community and the viability of our community. And I just look at, again, to me, it just looks like a distinct advantage. And sure, first adopters make out the best in this industry. And so I see time as their asset. But, at the same time, every other industry has to play by a different rule. And, they're already basing their whole industry on deregulation.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
We heard from the company's representatives tonight that this crypto mining is only one aspect of their entire company that they want to bring here to Branson. But none of those other aspects of their business will be done in those crypto mining menus. They have to be done in the primary structure. So, again, I am adamantly opposed to this.
Any other aldermen? We have a motion and a second. Clay, you have more input?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I don't know if advantage, I mean, I'm assuming the reason you would want to get those up and running is to get some revenue flowing while you're trying to build your, and if I was building a theater, I'm just going to give an example. If I was building a theater and I had all these employees, and I'm just trying to make the building wasn't done, hey, can I get a permit to perform on a flatbed trailer in the parking lot for the next 3 months till the building's finished so I can get some revenue going so I can continue building this structure? I don't know if that's an advantage. That's like, hey, can you help me out here so I can start making some money on this flatbed in the parking lot so I can continue building my structure and get this structure open so I can move inside the building? Is that a bad example?
No, but I'm afraid we're crossing over into the actual, their particular uses.
Talking about the industry.
Okay, as far as the ordinance itself. Okay, Holly, did you have something?
I just want to clarify that when I said a valid and active building permit, so the plans submitted have to include a primary structure with all of the plans of the accessory structures for the menu, all of the aspects of that, they have to be approved for that primary structure. So it's beyond just a simple drawing. I want to be clear that it's gone through the review process. All of those particularities have been clarified to have that valid building permit. I just want to make sure everyone understands what I meant by that.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
you just mentioned that we were supposed to be discussing the specific ordinance, not a company. This amendment speaks to a specific company, not the ordinance.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
I appreciate Artie's comment, but I'm not sure I really see that. we really are drawing up a general ordinance here. And obviously, elements of it are going, all the elements of it are going to fit a company that's in front of us. That's inevitable. But we are drawing up an ordinance. My thought on this is that, when you look at the construction time these days for a building, a decent office type building where you could put servers or people into or whatever the application's going to be, you're probably better than 12 months out before you take occupancy in that building in today's market, and maybe 18. And when I look at this industry, and again, I'm not talking about a specific company, similar to what Ralph said, it's unique because through these menus, they're able to generate revenue fairly quickly, which many businesses would not be able to do. Most businesses would have to sit and wait for that primary structure. But in this case, they have the ability to generate revenue, to start their jobs flowing, to start paying electric bills, all those kind of things. And I think as long as we're comfortable that we as a city have control over this, so that we can actually say, this is part of a complete plan, we understand the timelines, you're guaranteeing us you're in these timelines, and we will shut you down if we see you're playing games here, like if you start a foundation and then nothing's happening for 6 months, we shut them down. If we're comfortable that we've got that level of control as a city, and I believe that's what Kathy was articulating, not only comfortable, but empowered and desirable to do it, then I think this makes sense for the uniqueness of this industry.
That's why I mentioned the protection in the beginning. And I think Kathy verified that.
Mr. Mayor, I'm a firm believer of treating businesses fairly straight across the board. The businesses in our entire city have had to commit to brick and mortar, a temporary permit for just one type of business. How many more businesses are going to come in and think, well, I don't want to have to invest either. Why don't we get to take advantage of that type of opportunity too? Even similar, if you take it to a residential, we're going to build our garage first, and then they can come in and get extension after extension on a temporary use permit, and they can have their family living in that garage next to other people who have had to build a house and then the garage and use it for a car. So I think we need to be fair straight across the board, and doing this for one specific business, I cannot agree with this.
Okay, let me ask a question to Holly, and maybe there's some middle ground. Holly, that first sentence says, a primary structure shall be required prior to the installation of a menu. That could be interpreted as they cannot start installing menus until the structure is complete. So I'm wondering if there's some middle ground that says that the primary structure and the menus can go under that building permit. However, the occupancy or the operations would not be permitted until the building was completed.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to say something. In staff and the drafting of this ordinance and all of the work that went into it, at the heart of it was the protection of our community and the residents in this community, right? And, that primary structure shall be required prior to the installation of the menu. It's incumbent on us, because of the newness of this industry, that when this was drafted, we had to go by the history of this industry. And the history, unfortunately for you guys, and you even mentioned it, is it Michael. It's riddled with bad actors. That was the history that we had to use in order to come up with the ordinance and find guardrails that were fair for us and any industry like this that would come into our community. It's unfortunate that there are bad actors, but that's what we had to base everything on. When we looked outside of, to what was going on in other cities and states and around the country, it was very unattractive, and it was very hard. And I think that this ordinance represents the best interpretation of us looking outward and taking into consideration, not everyone is bad actors, but there are bad actors, and we definitely don't want to attract them, but we want to attract people that are truly invested in this community. And Bob even mentioned, they're going to put about $2 million, a company would probably put, see how I did that? About $2 million in the ground just to get started. And to me, that's an investment in the community and an investment in longevity. And they're willing to do that. But, we still have to, thwart off the bad actors, because in this industry, a lot of revenue gets created really, really fast. Really, really fast. $2 million is like a drop in the bucket to this industry.
Yeah.
And it truly is.
And
So
keep in mind, the ordinance is not just for, it's for any industry, anybody that comes to town.
I was just using the example that he put, that there are bad actors.
Yeah. So, yeah, and I'm just reminding the ordinance is for everybody. I will say I've heard from several of the owners that as they were contemplating the support of this, several of them did mention that they had a higher comfort level if the primary structure was built. I mean, that was one of their decision-making points.
Mr. Mayor, to Ralph's point, and I'm going to speak as broad as I possibly can on this. I have witnessed as a citizen and perhaps even as an alderman, companies attempt to be coercive in what they do to try to intimidate or subvert our zoning laws. And so that's my fear on something like this, speaking to what Ralph's saying. So again, just keeping it as broad as possible, I'm going to be a no on this amendment.
Just as a point of clarification, the primary structure for staff was included because primary structures are required everywhere so that you can't just have accessory structures. That I just want to clarify that goes to Ruth's continuity throughout. This isn't a punishment. This isn't a one-upmanship. It isn't a money down. It is part of our development requirements across the board.
Yeah, I can see that. Any other questions, comments? Ready to vote? All in favor of this amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Nay.
No.
Mayor
Hill, would you take a
Yes.
roll call vote, please?
Lucas,
Absolutely no.
Denham,
No.
Cooper,
Yes.
Howden,
No.
LeBlanc,
No.
Schultz.
Yes.
So there are 4 yeses and, nope, I'm sorry, 4 noes, 2 yeses. The motion fails.
Mr. Mayor, I have no further amendments at this time.
Any other aldermen have any? Artie? So if there's no further amendments,
If we're ready, though, I would like to speak to the general ordinance as
okay,
amended.
I'd like to give the audience, if anybody in the audience has any comments before we vote. Come on up to the mic, you get 1 shot.
And this is commenting on the bill as amended
As-
so
I'm
far.
sorry, yeah.
Or the amendment so far.
So the comments we want to hear are on the ordinance as amended.
So the discussion you just had, so the only question, it's more of a question that other people may also wonder about. The menus, I'm thinking in my mind that those are those boxes, those temporary Bitcoin boxes. They still make noise.
we've addressed the noise
Okay,
ordinance. that it
so
can't-
the noise, I was just wanting to make sure that the noise on the menus is covered.
Yes.
If that comes before the
Yes.
physical structure. That's all. Thank you.
You know, I wanted, if you don't mind, Gabe brought up a couple other points that before we vote, I'd like to hear the board's input on. The 50-foot setback, that 50-foot setback is on all sides of the property, is that correct? Kathy says yes. Any aldermen have any thoughts about that?
Mr. Mayor, I personally, what hasn't been talked about here much in relation to setbacks, obviously it has implications from a noise, but we really are controlling the noise at the boundary of the property. The thing that really hasn't been talked about, but was in the discussions relative to setbacks, besides the obvious aesthetics and those kind of things, is these facilities are very high consumers of electric energy, very high. And more than 99.9% of that electric energy gets dissipated right in the environment. So if you take general standards from the crypto industry, and you take a menu that's a 40-foot long menu, today, it's not unusual that one of those structures are consuming 1 megawatt of power constantly, just constantly. Now put 5 of those out there, which would kind of be typical in these scenarios. And we've seen the pictures of the disastrous ones where there's dozens of them out there. But just, imagine a few of those. There's going to be a tremendous outflow of heat from those facilities. And that setback, I think, provides reasonable boundaries for that heat to dissipate rather than just overwhelming a neighbor community. Now, there's no way to precisely engineer something like that because you've got wind, you've got so many different variables, but at least it seems reasonable to me to have some setback to prevent melting your neighbor's aluminum or your neighbor's plastic siding and their windows and things from the heat.
Okay, any other board members? Yes.
I've just kind of a question. The brick wall is meant to address sound, though.
Yes.
That's correct, right?
And aesthetics.
And aesthetics. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Another issue that Gabe brought up, and I didn't know if the board wanted to address it before we go to a vote, is Gabe's issue with the DBA versus DBC, stating that OSHA uses DBA as a measuring tool nationwide as a standard.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Yeah, so I guess I'd like to talk about that a little bit. First, it's interesting, the OSHA regulations will apply to the workers on these types of facilities. They will be OSHA regulated, and OSHA regulations that we're talking about are designed to protect the hearing of the workers. That's its only function. So you usually end up with, in high noise environments, and I've worked in these over 40 years, you end up actually wearing the equivalent of a dosimeter with you to show how much noise you're being exposed to and that you're complying with OSHA regulations. And you may be required to have a certain level of hearing protection for that. That's what the OSHA regulations do. And it is true that OSHA regulations in terms of those exposure levels to individuals, and that's all they are, is exposure levels to individuals, to workers. It does not apply to non-workers, like neighbors and things like that. It only applies to the workers, is based on DBA. However, it's also interesting to note that all the protection gear that we have to wear in those environments are rated in DBCs. So it's just kind of interesting. The industry isn't quite as clean as has perhaps been suggested. I thought it would be interesting, so I pulled the OSHA technical manual. My old
Would you
engine.
read that to us, please?
Oh, I'm glad you asked, Mr. Mayor. You will have no trouble sleeping tonight. So the OSHA Technical Manual, Section 3, Chapter 5, Paragraph 9, loudness and weighting networks. And I don't mean to make light of this because it is serious. I'll just quote from that. The A and C weighting networks, so A and C, that's the DBA and DBC that we're talking about. The A and C weighting networks are the sound levels meter means of responding to some frequencies more than others. The very low frequencies are discriminated against, parentheses, attenuated, quite severely by the A network and hardly at all by the C network. Okay, so this is why we specified the C network, because most of the noise from a crypto mining facility is in the low frequency area. Okay, so that's a reference there. Here's a reference from Honeywell, and Honeywell is the leading provider of sound protection equipment. This is the stuff that's rated in DBCs. It's called noise reduction rating when you read it on the plate, but they're giving it to you in DBCs. Here's what Honeywell says. The A weighting scale lets the sound level meter hear soft sounds approximately the way an average normal human ear does, by making the meter less sensitive to low frequency and some high frequency energy. The C weighting scale, which is what we're proposing, is used to measure loud sounds with approximately equal sensitivity at all frequencies, just like the human ear. So there's this odd effect in human hearing that when we have very low sounds, like you might expect in your bedroom at night when you're trying to sleep, those low frequency noises are harder for us to hear when you're in a very low noise environment. As that environment gets noisier, those low frequencies become much more apparent to you, even though they're the same level that they were in your bedroom situation. So that's why we specified C. A couple of comments were made also that are kind of revealing. The examples given, and I've done these myself in preparation for this ordinance, of going out and reading DBA versus DBC at an air conditioner is a great example of this. And the report was that the DBC readings are higher. And that's exactly what should happen, because those air conditioners put out a lot of low frequency noise. And what is an air conditioner in the end? It's a great big fan that's cooling off stuff inside the cabinets. The scenario is not that far from the cooling package in a typical menu set up according to our ordinance. One other thing that I think got misinterpreted, if I understood it correctly, regarding our ordinance. So let's say that somebody picks a site that meets our requirements for the ordinance, and they go out before they build anything, and day and night they take sound level readings there, and it comes out as 70 dBc. Can't be avoided, it's 70 dBc. As long as they don't raise the level beyond 70 dBc, they're good to go. They actually got a few more decibels for free out of the fact that the ambient noise around them is that much higher than what our ordinance says. So if you go somewhere and you're reading 65 dBc, as long as you don't violate that, and that's the noise all the time, not just under specific weather circumstances, then you're good from our ordinance. So I think we've done a good job. I commend the staff on the work on those DBCs. I know it's a touchy issue, it's an extraordinarily technical issue, and it's probably the kind of thing we don't normally have to deal with on the Aldermen board, but I'm glad with the work that's been done.
Okay. And
Can I just piggyback real quick what
you bet.
Glenn said? Because I texted my sound man when Gabe got up and spoke about the DBCs, and I simply said, do we measure at our shows DBA or DBC? And his reply was, some of the louder shows in our theater, we definitely measure in DBC because of the subwoofers and the lower rumble of the low end, which is basically what he just said. He said if I were to go up and check the the decibels in our offices or our computer, or, you know, where the offices are, or household appliances, I would do it in A, but in the shows, because of the louder volume and the low-end subs, he measures in C.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
This is a bit unusual because I think we have an alderman with quite a bit of expertise. Would it be okay if I addressed a quick question to Glenn?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I thought you were talking about me. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead, Glenn. You take. I gotta go to the bathroom.
Yeah, but you phone a friend.
That is correct.
So, Glenn, is the idea that we would have some type of a GIS mapping of what the ambient noise at any given property would be, or is 70 general enough that you could assume that's what it was? How would we know that ahead of time before the project was built?
Yeah, I was speaking in generalities, first of all, with the 70 as an example. I wasn't saying that's what it is. So our ordinance today says you have to get a registered professional engineer to essentially make all these measurements around the perimeter of your property and record all the data that we ask for, turn it into the city, and that should show that you're meeting the ordinance. If I were doing this, the very first thing I would do is get that registered professional engineer at the site before I put one stick into the site, so I knew where I was starting. Because now I know how much remediation I might have to do, I know how much wiggle room I have, and so on. And you have to really be careful because it's going vary according to relative humidity, temperature, which way the wind's blowing, you know, is Clay Cooper's theater rocking down there and making noise up on the hill or whatever, you know, you got to be careful.
So would we have a mechanism as a city, if it is incumbent on the applicant, and then they presented us with something where the wind was really whipping and it was registered at 80 or some odd dBc, would we have a mechanism as a city to make sure that that wasn't set higher than what we're intending because of a untoward wind event or something?
Yeah, so we do, if you look at the details on that section, we do require that they record all the weather conditions as well for that very reason, so that somebody doesn't cherry pick a situation that works to their favor. And remember, in the end, first of all, registered professional engineers, you know, go about their work with a great deal of conscientiousness. I mean, their whole career depends on it. One bad report and they can lose their license and their career goes away. So normally they're going to be biased to working this out, you know, to the letter of the law, essentially. But ultimately, as it says in the ordinance, we can also send our own engineers out there if we feel that, you know, somebody's played games, or maybe the situation's changed, or a neighbor's suddenly complaining that now it seems noisier. You know, we can go out and investigate, and it may be nothing, but if it is, talk it over with the owners and try to get it resolved.
Forgive me, I have one more quick thing, and I know it's a small thing. Bob brought up the concrete walkways between the menus. I don't know if that's specifically addressed in our ordinance. If it is, just a couple thoughts. I've been in meetings where having gravel or impervious cover will help with the sound and the heat and all that. Adding concrete will deter from that. So I'm just questioning the board's opinion on the importance of walking from menu to menu. Is it important to make sure that that's concrete versus impervious cover?
Just to be clear, Mayor, the
Yes.
language in the ordinance is all parking areas, drive aisles, service areas, storage, and loading docks shall be constructed of a hard surface.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, and I had asked the question related to that. You know, there was thoughts, should we mandate a concrete pad under the menus, right? And after talking with the Terra folks who have some experience there, and then looking at the industry, that might actually be detrimental to
Yes.
require that, because it could make the sound worse, it could affect their cooling. So we left the area under the menu at the builder's discretion.
Yeah, so, and that's really why I brought it up, Glenn. Yeah, because of that rationale. So.
Mr. Mayor, one last thing.
Yes.
I know we've addressed like the noise, the dB noise nuisance kind of thing, but, you know, I got to tell you, the underlying factor is really a health component too. And you know, it's kind of unspoken in a sense because everyone's just talking about what they hear, but it's really about what you're exposed to over a period of time. Because the nervous system is very fascinating in that it'll actually adjust to its environment. Like you put yourself, like in your house. When you're in your house, you don't hear those low-level noises. You just hear the things that are outside of your normal environment. Like if someone knocks on your door, right? You hear that. That gets your attention. Well, after a period of time and you're exposed to something, as long as your nervous system doesn't perceive it as a definite threat, it kind of tunes it out over time. And that's in essence what happens, but you're still exposed to the vibration or those decibel ratings over a period of time. So I think like these guardrails really address that component of it, and I'd be remiss if I didn't bring that up because it's not just about noise. It's about the overall health of our community. It's quality of life issue for me. And that's why I really love what our staff has done with this ordinance, because I think unbeknownst to them, they really have addressed it on multiple levels. And I think this, you know, really puts us heads and shoulders and ahead of the game. And, you know, but we'll see.
Yep.
Can we, have you, Mr.
Oh, we
Mayor?
weren't? I interrupted myself? Come on up,
Why don't
come
we
on up,
finish
Bob.
Alderman comments before we go to
Okay.
public comments?
Yeah. Any other Alderman comments?
Yes.
Artie?
I'd like to follow up on what Ralph was saying. I have a very, very bad case of tinnitus. And after trying to stay on top of that all day long, I come home and I'm flat worn out. And it's exactly the same thing that we would be exposing our residents to, and I'm not in favor of that.
Thank you, Artie. Any other Alderman?
Will we come back to Alderman comments after public comments?
Yes, we will.
Okay.
Bob, you want to come up? Anybody else want to come up also? I'd like to hear any closing statements before we go to vote.
Yes, not talking about a particular site, but having visited with a group to help create these ordinances and some of the things they suggested that you've done. It was discussed that would be a primary building. It wasn't going to be first. The menus had to come first because that's what we're doing, but that's irregardless. What I'm worried about is that we also said, we were asked, what can you get this sound level down to? We said 65 decibels at the property line, or maybe, I don't know, at the property line. And we used dBA. Now, I don't have a problem. I'm not an engineer, and I tried to find a conversion from A to C. There's no such thing.
It's B, Bob.
That's right. I knew you'd know it. So here's my question, or here's my example of what has been done, okay? From the best of my ability to do that conversion, which there is no real way, but there are sine waves that tell you where they intersect. I would like to say that this is similar to us deciding today that the speed limit on Highway 65 is 65 miles per hour. Everybody gets that information, and then you go to write the ordinance, and you said 65 kilometers per hour. Am I going to get a ticket from him for doing 40 in a 65 because really 40 is 68 kilometers per hour?
Yes, you will.
So that, I know you would make sure I get one. That's the problem, is we changed the method of measuring.
I see that, yeah.
And we didn't change the scales. The other thing I would say is we do have, first of all, we now know why they're calling menus structures. They're not, they're machines, but we're calling them structures so they can be a non-primary structure in this code. I would suggest that is a method of which is deterring the growth. They want to put in menus. I understand you're worried about them being transient. I've already demonstrated. They'll have more money in this project in the menus alone, in the installation of the menus, than the golf course would in their miniature golf courses, and they have no buildings they have to have. The tracks don't have to have a building. They built one, but they don't have to have one. We have several tracks that have no building. They buy their tickets somewhere else. We have businesses that don't have buildings.
And Bob,
And-
there again, this isn't
Yeah.
for them, it's for the
No,
next
it's
guy.
for the industry, but the industry would have to meet those codes, and 65 dBc cannot be met. We already have an ambient measure higher than that.
Okay,
Thank you.
yes.
I just want to touch on the DBA, DBC thing, and I'm just going to be straightforward with this. The way that it's written right now, 65 DBC, there will be no industry that comes here. I've been very well versed in the data center, the crypto mines, and that whole side of the industry for years and years now. So just taking away the crypto mines, these loud machines, these menus, this ordinance would stop any data center from coming in. So I think that the city just needs to ask themselves that question. Do you want to isolate any data center, any AI? We all know where the world is going. Do you want to isolate it for that? Because going by a DBC standard will do that. And there's no way to have a control for this. You know, I went up there and the ratings do change from wind and everything like that. They're very variable. And DBA is a lot more stable. I understand DBC gets very loud frequencies. That's why you have the hearing aids for loud pops, drops, you know, inside of buildings. It measures that a lot better. This is a slow, steady hum that I think everyone is worried about. So measuring this in DBC is like an air conditioner. The air conditioner outside of City Hall from your property line is 65. So, you know, or not Celsius, I'm sorry, DBC. So going from that standard, you guys are right on the line there. And I want to emphasize also the property line is 1,200 feet from anything. Sound waves, DBC, DBA, DBB, all these, they dissipate over time. So I think the real question here is with this ordinance, you know, you have a lot of protections in here, great. You know, tons of things, the building, all of that, that's great. The biggest problem though is that no data center or anything falling under this industry would come to Branson for this, strictly from the DBC standard. So thank you.
Thank you for that. My comment, yes. Yeah, my comment to that is we've spent a lot of time on DBA, DBC, and the majority of this room, especially me, have no idea what the heck that means. So we're hearing a point of view, we're hearing a point of view. What I'm going to suggest is that we vote on this tonight, and if it gets passed, we have a few weeks before our second read at our Board of Aldermen meeting. And between now and then, if we can get more factual data for this board to understand what you just said, because I'm hearing another opinion. I don't want to try to solve that tonight, but I would like to leave it on the table that when we go to give a final read, that gets readdressed. Is that fair? Okay. Oh, I'm sorry, Kathy?
No, don't apologize. Thank you, Mayor, for allowing me to speak. I was just going to recommend that, similar to what we did with the short-term rental package that we brought to you all, and knowing that based on public comment and maybe more technical understanding being brought to the table, that we can still have another conversation. I like the idea of bringing professional sound engineers to the table, people that don't have a dog in the fight, if you will. Impartial professionals. I think that could be very informational to us. So I'm more than happy to help coordinate that. One of the questions I have for you guys from Tara, given I'm very familiar with how federal agencies work and how many years it takes them to adopt new rules and the federal registry requirements, et cetera, and the lawsuits that ensue, and it goes on for decades. Do you all know when was the last time, or if ever, a decibel limit was established by OSHA for this type of specific industry? Because I can't imagine, given the slow sloth-like reaction and speed of the feds, that they would even be up to speed with this industry today. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't know if you guys have any background information on that you could share.
Not specifically, but I will tell you that in the last 2 days, I did speak with OSHA representatives from the St. Louis office as well as the Kansas City office. Both of them, upon me sending them the copy of the ordinances and telling them we wanted to measure in DBC, both said, why in the world would you do that? Now, Glenn did a great job, actually. I've spoken to less than a dozen engineers this past week, and he did an incredible job of explaining the differences between the two. I would have never been able to do that. He really articulated it very well. I know, but there's a level of complexity to it that really, like, as you said, there's just, to try and wrap your head around it and understand the differences. It was pretty clear to me too that just from one engineer to the next, the sort of idiosyncrasies of what they're talking about between the two, and like, as we said, kind of like a conversion factor. So that was really where I was getting at is, sure, you want us to measure DBC? We'll measure DBC, but let's find out what the real number is.
Yep.
So that was really the impetus for my calling all of them was, hey, give me the formula. How do I convert 65 dBA to DBC? And right, you're shaking your head. Some say, well, it all comes down to how you're correlating it. You have to set the hertz. And you set a hertz, and right, and so I think 5 different engineers are gonna have 5 different opinions about that. And that's kind of why I came to you today and said, well, it's as if we're writing our own international building code here. Why would we go about that when we could just go back? And so you bring up an excellent point, which is at a sloth-like pace of the federal government or of any regulatory agency, have they touched this? And so all I can say is I talked to OSHA, and they simply said that they recommended that, 1, that we stick to DBA because that's what they can regulate, and that 2, that we reach out to licensed entities here in the state. They're called, I've got the term written down, as a matter of fact. Anyway, I've got the names of the 2. I reached out to one of them. One of them is Axiom Pro Services Testing, their engineering firm, and the other is Jergiel or something. I spoke with both of them. And both of them got really in depth about the difference in the hertz and all this and stuff. So I'm not saying we're wrong in using DBC. I think that us dictating a specific number, like Bob just said, it's like, hey, the highway through town goes 70. We saw that. We said, hey, we're going to be even better than that. We'll do 60. So like OSHA 70, we came in and we said, we're going to be even better than that. We'll do 65. You guys said, yeah, 65, great, but DBC instead of DBA. And we're all like, whoa, we don't have enough time.
Yeah.
And if they're going to invest $5 million on this site, nobody would take the risk to do that unless we really have the information and know that we can meet that requirement. And I say all that to say, too, you guys don't know me, and I'm just some guy from out of town, right? And I don't have a vested interest necessarily like other constituents here do. But I think for an architect, I'm licensed in 26 states. I have built all over this country. And I think for architects, legacy means something else to us, right? The things that I design and the things that I build will be around long after I'm gone. And so the way that I look at every project is, what does it really mean, and what have I done, and have I done the correct thing? And I think, you know, these days there's a lack of that in our nation, and I think people kind of just blow through these things. And who am I to tell you? You don't know me from anybody, but I'm trying to stay away from talking about the specific project, right?
Yeah,
But
there is no, yeah. How do you feel about the ordinance?
to get the ordinance right, I think we need to tune that up, because I think that this could be a landmark way of doing it. It could be the shining beacon that everybody says, look at the way they did it in Branson, they did it right. And I think we're really close. We really are.
Within the next couple weeks.
Yes.
And this is so important that I'm gonna say it. If we can't get this resolved in the next couple weeks, I'm going to suggest we postpone it until we do get it, so we get it right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, and one other thing, to go back, and I don't know if it's too late because you guys have already voted on it, but I do want to speak about the primary building versus the auxiliary structures.
I think we're past that.
Because it kills the deal because of the way that the deal is structured with White River specifically, and I know that's project specific, but again, it goes back to what Mike said. You're eliminating potential for new companies to come in, new data centers. So it does really speak to the ordinance itself because of the way that a PPA is structured, a power purchase agreement is structured between an end user and a power company. It dictates that almost immediately they have to start consuming an enormous threshold of power. The only way to do that is by setting down a machine that can consume that power. It has nothing to do with we're gonna fly by night and we're gonna move out of town and we're not gonna build the primary building, which again, as Ms. Dodge said, you do have the protections from the city. You would shut that site down, no problem, if that building wasn't getting built. It's that no data center would ever come to town with that regulation in place simply because of the way that PPAs are structured as a whole nationwide. So that is what you need to consider. And so, again, you guys want to talk about fairness, and it's not fair to one industry that they have to wait until their building's done. Well, it's not fair to this industry to not be judged by the same sound standards that everybody else in town is judged by, which is a DBA. So if we're going to keep it level across the board, let's keep it level across the board, right? And so I do think you had a great point there. It doesn't need to be prior to or anything. They can come in conjunction with. That slab is going to be started in that primary structure day one. And $1 million worth of underground electrical infrastructure to be started day one. And about the same time they come in, yeah, maybe the menus get set a few months before the building's finished, but it'll be well underway. Nobody's trying to pull one over on anybody. It's a matter of the way the PPA is structured. And Devin with White River could probably speak to the industry at large and why that particular clause will kill that industry for Branson.
Mayor, one more thing, if I can just follow up on that.
Yeah.
So just going back to using OSHA as a standard bearer, and that's where I'm struggling a little bit, and I'm almost wondering, because again, lots of research has been going on by almost all of us in City Hall on this,
Right.
on this issue. But one of the things that I was wondering, I'm thinking about potential effects on wildlife and some of the, like USDA or
Absolutely.
even EPA with environmental
That's a
health
very real thing,
standards,
yes.
right? So they regulate air and water. I can't remember if we did anything on sound at the time or not. I don't recall.
And that's where Schultz's comments are, he's absolutely right. So it's the non-auditory levels of sound that DVC catches. It's the thing that drives snakes out of a field because they feel in that rumbling, or animals out of the woods, right? So again, I'm not saying necessarily DVC is the wrong form of measurement. I'm saying, sure, let's use it. Let's qualify the number. For example, we took DVC readings today at the site, just with crickets chirping and the wind blowing, the DVC level is 80.
So you've got an easy hurdle then.
Maybe.
Well, you do.
Maybe. Right, but I
right?
think
You did, as long as you don't raise it above 80, you're good to go.
I believe that's the process, Bob. I believe the way that works is and the way this is intended is if there was a company in Branson that was interested in doing this, and they went through the process for a special use permit, I believe that's when that would come up is, here's the natural ground today.
you know what it's affected most by? You've got an active mining site and an active quarry less than a mile away. That low rumble of that quarry going all day is affecting that site directly. So the site levels there are directly.
Okay, but time out. But it's not rumbling at night.
What's that?
It's not rumbling at night.
Perhaps not.
Right? Because I know my first thought on this is if you stand out there at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, there's a lot of noise. So you could generate noise that wouldn't even be heard. But you go out there at 3 in the morning, I'm here to tell you, it is quiet. And so little noises, will go a long way.
Kathy, if I can, just on the OSHA issue, I think it is true, OSHA is geared towards DBAs, other than what I read in the fact that all their hearing protection's DBCs. But if you talk to the average factory safety officer, they're going to tell you by book what the DBA levels are, right? But the important thing is, OSHA does not regulate anything outside of that environment. OSHA is about worker safety, about protecting their hearing over the long haul. And so there are standards that say if you have this much DBA noise, you can only be exposed for 2 hours. If you get this much, you can be exposed for 5 hours. If it's below this, you can live in it all day long. But that's all worker protection. There isn't a single thing that OSHA has to say in relation to street noise, residential noise, anything else. It does not regulate that industry.
So there again, hold on. We're not going to solve this tonight. We have 2 weeks before the next meeting, and you can just imagine, this board, we need some expertise and guidance, right?
Right.
Or we pull out a guitar, one of the two.
I'm down for either one. Yeah. No,
Okay.
we would appreciate
How
the
loud would
expertise
you
as
like
well,
it,
frankly,
Mayor?
because if a client comes to me and says, Mr. Architect, I'm holding you responsible to make sure that this project is engineered and is going to meet these regulations, well, that scares the heck out of me too, because it's such a new thing, this DBC. we really do need some expertise at the table, and we're saying we're absolutely willing to hang on board
Yeah.
and to go through this process to get it right the first time.
Yep. Thank you.
And please, to reconsider and to also be able to discuss the primary structure issue. I think you absolutely, as the city, have the protections in place to stop the use of the facility at all and just cut off the electricity even if that primary structure building isn't going up according to schedule. But the way that it's written right now, you exclude any future prospects from coming to town.
Excuse me, Gabe, I know you don't want to hear this, but we brought that up, there was amendment suggested, and the board voted it down.
So is that, it's just,
Well, unless.
I would appeal to the board to please allow that to be reconsidered.
I mean, it'll
And
be
not
brought
to
up at
maybe
the
to
sec-
decide on it tonight.
Amendment, the amendment failed.
The amendment failed, but we could bring it up.
Yeah,
If
I'm
we
sorry.
pull this
Yeah.
on the 13th, we could bring the amendment
It
back
could,
up.
yeah, we could bring it
Thank
back
you.
up on the 13th.
Much appreciated.
Okay.
Candace Cook, I live in Branson, and I'll reiterate again how much I appreciate you all putting so much diligence in crafting this excellent and elegant ordinance. I have shared the draft of this ordinance with the National Coalition Against XYZ. And I can tell you, because, let's just get it on the table, this is a nebulous and a very primitive young industry, as we know. We don't know down the road. And again, I'm going to reiterate and give you appreciation for being the watchers on the wall. It's always best to be overprotective and have industry come in and challenge and ask you for special perimeters. This ordinance is not crafted for these people. We've already said that, right? We're not doing that. And yet tonight, all along, the speakers, the quote-unquote people who have a dog in the fight, have stood up and demanded that we craft this ordinance around their need. And that is wrong. So that's hypocritical, that's two-faced. And that's not the way we do business here in Branson. That's like Ruth said, we treat one like we treat all. This is an excellent ordinance, the way it is with these new amendments tonight. It is fair, it is equitable. And if someone wants to come in and challenge it and do business here, then they can follow those parameters. If you cannot, make everybody happy and go somewhere else. There should be a clear message. I liked what the good architect just mentioned. And no, we don't think you're fly-by-night, and we have great faith in your expertise. But we're not the ones in this community to make that judgment. That's neither here nor there. The problem is, he said, you know, we're crafting this bill and it's against, and yet they're asking for the special permissions. And he said, if it's going to bar industry from here.
Candace, we're really discussing the ordinance.
The ordinance.
And the amendments to the ordinance.
I'm asking that you please keep the amendments as they are, pass this thing tonight, and let the chips fall where they may. This isn't the only game in town. These aren't the only people. Let's keep the amendment like it is, in its golden, elegant form that we amended tonight, that protects all of us and protects our environment, the citizens, and just the integrity of our city. And then let the people come if they want to do business. And if they can't, then let them go elsewhere. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Candace. Does the I thought you were asleep back there.
First of all, we're talking about primary structure.
State your name for the record, please.
My name is Gary Groman.
Thank you.
At my age, I forget where I live, but as far as primary structure goes, we're talking about one zoning district. Not all. I don't want to hear this stuff about all over town, they do this and that, and it's not fair. We're talking about one zone. This primary structure situation we're talking about applies in industrial only. That's number one. Number two, I appreciate what you're going to do over the next 2 weeks. You're going to get all these experts in, hopefully they'll be impartial. But when I taught my classes, I used the KISS method. Keep it simple, sir. And what I would suggest to you is if you could give us some example of the sound rating at point A was 60 dBA. Measuring that same sound at point A, the sound rating was, in dBc, was X. If you could do that, then maybe we'd all be in a better position to understand it. And again, I thank you all for.
Completely agree. Thank you, Gary.
Yeah, and that was my,
No, I think the board, yes, I want to hear from the board before we vote.
that was kind of my question too. If that number is 65A, what is that equal to in 65C? I mean,
Right.
he's exactly right. And then you find out because of,
Yeah, but let me address that.
hold on. And I know what you said.
We don't need to discuss it
but there's
tonight.
got to be.
Can I call for the question?
Yes. Well, wait a minute. Are there any other aldermen that have questions or comments about the ordinance, the amendments, before we vote? Is that your hand up to vote? Oh, you have a comment, yes.
So, the DBA versus DBC,
Oh,
they are
God.
not, Mr. Mayor, this is the alderman speaking. The DBA versus the DBC, they are not convertible. So we just got to get that out of our head. You cannot look at one and convert it to the other. It doesn't happen. So they're irreconcilable. So, did you phone a friend in between there?
Oh, I said that wasn't my question, but carry on.
Okay.
We got 2 weeks and I'll talk to you about it later.
And I would certainly offer Kathy to be a part of any engineering activity in that regard. In general, about the ordinance, it's been said a few times, but I think it's worth saying again, the amount of hours, and I would imagine we're at hundreds of hours at this point, of staff time, man-hours invested that probably were supposed to be going on other projects. And now that I said man-hours, maybe that's not even right. It'd probably be more accurate to say women hours because the majority of the staff that worked on this were women. We've got Jennifer in our planning department put a huge amount of effort in this. She did a lot of research about all the communities that had problems with crypto centers, and she looked at what those ordinances were so she could understand where they failed in their mission. She also took a good look at ordinances from other communities that hadn't dealt with an issue but took a good cut at trying to have an appropriate ordinance. I know Kathy herself talked to other communities to get a handle on their ordinances. And then Holly has spent a tremendous amount of time going through the legal aspects of this and keeping our rails on. And then Amanda has sat through I don't know how many meetings trying to keep everybody moving forward and stay on agenda and get it done. So I really want to say thank you.
Glenn?
I've never seen such extraordinary effort as that.
I'm trying to get a vote on this.
I understand.
Right after this is reports, so we can share some of, I'm just trying to
understand.
Keep us on track.
Understand.
Okay.
Appreciate that. So, from my perspective, I think the ordinance that we're voting on as amended is in pretty good shape. I think we can look at DBA versus DBC or setting a DBC rating, even if it's not in 2 weeks. There's nothing that prevents us from coming back 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, and making a change to the ordinance. There were other areas like this in the ordinance that got touched on briefly that we consciously said, let's just stop here, and we can always come back to this in the future. And a good example of that was mentioned was water cooling. If you notice in our ordinance, we have exactly one sentence about water cooling. And if we were going to get serious about water cooling, we'd have paragraphs of ordinances about water cooling because of the tremendous impact it could have on our community. So I feel we've got the ordinance in good shape. I think we've got good scope for where we are today. I am super appreciative of all the residents and business inputs that have helped us fine-tune the ordinance. And I also have to say thanks to the Terra folks. They were always available. They sat down with us in a subsequent meeting from their first one with modified plans, admitting they heard some of the feedback from the community and they wanted to be responsive to that and had changed their plans.
Alderman Schultz, can we put this on the report section, please?
I'll wrap up. And so I want to thank those guys too, because they've gone a great way to help us understand what it takes in an industry that we weren't that familiar with. So with that, this ordinance, from my perspective, fellow aldermen, has my vote, and I'd be ready to pull it down from the agenda and discuss the other things on the 13th.
Madam Clerk, would you provide a roll call vote on this bill as amended, please?
Lucas?
Yes.
Didham?
Yes.
Cooper?
Yes.
Howden?
Yes.
LeBlanc?
Yes.
Schultz?
Yes.
The result of the vote is 6-0. Motion carries.
Thank you. Are there any aldermen wishing to provide any reports or comments? No?
At this time, Mayor, I'm just
Yes.
going to keep my mouth shut because I'm going to say something I shouldn't.
Good idea. I would second that. No? Anybody? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion's adjourned. Thank you very much for coming out.